many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
And welcome to it's definitely um, wiping out these small islands. We're in Houston. We've seen all these you know floods, and it wasn't all the winds, and you just had a lot of water that came in, and a lot of rain on top of it. So what they're experiencing, being an island, it will shed the water rapid, and a lot of these islands are pretty small. So they don't have a long term, 4 week of flooding, 2 weeks of flooding. What they're having is basically just kind of a washing away of everything. Um, and On the one island, I read also the French officials said that they know for a fact that all the strongest, uh, more structural buildings on one island were completely destroyed. So the most structurally sound buildings have been wiped out. So that kind of lets you know. Also, weather stations that were in the path of this never even got to record full impact. They were destroyed before it actually made landfall. So that just kind of lets you know the intensity of this storm. Um, it will be bigger than the one that hit Houston, but where is it going to hit? We're still waiting to see exactly what path it decides to take as it's hitting these islands. They're definitely planning on it hitting Cuba. And will it try to ride up the East Coast, or will it cut across Florida, or will it, hit the tip of Florida and head towards the Gulf? Many believe that it's going to head more kind of up the East Coast or through Florida towards Tennessee, just because of some of the cool water now in the Gulf from the last hurricane. And if I can find this article here, I'll get to it. This one from the Libertarian Republic, and it's in category Abuse of Authority, headline news. Virgin Islands allows National Guard to seize guns, ammo ahead of Hurricane Irma. U.S. Virgin Islands Governor Kenneth Mapp signed an emergency order allowing the seizure of private guns, ammunition, explosives, and property the National Guard may need to respond to Hurricane Irma. Mapp signed the order Monday in preparation for Hurricane Irma. The order allows the Adjutant General of the Virgin Islands to seize private property they believe necessary to protect the island, subject to approval by the territory's Justice Department. Mapp issued an emergency declaration Tuesday and mobilized National Guard units to prepare for the massive storm. This is not an opportunity to go outside and try to have fun with a hurricane, Mapp said. It's not time to get on a surfboard. Irma strengthened to a Category 5 storm Tuesday, with wind gusts hitting 175 miles an hour. Irma's eye is expected to pass just north of the heart of the U.S. Virgin Islands on Wednesday and bring 4 to 8 inches of rain and 60-mile-per-hour wind gusts. The National Hurricane Center is calling the storm extremely dangerous. Weather forecasters say Irma is headed towards the Florida coastline and should bring devastating conditions to the region in the next 4 or 5 days. GOP Florida Governor Rick Scott and Puerto Rico Governor Ricardo Rossello both declared states of emergencies, and in anticipation of Irma, Scott said President Donald Trump offered the full resources of the federal government as Floridians prepare for Hurricane Irma. Excuse me. Irma comes more than 1 week after Hurricane Harvey brought devastating floods to the greater Houston area. And there on that article on the Libertarian Republic, they do have a link to the PDF that the Daily Caller put out, the Virgin Islands emergency order. So you can click that and actually go read the actual order. Again, that was from the Libertarian Republic. So, hopefully we see, the outpouring for these people, again, neighbor taking care of neighbor. I think we will. I think this tends to be human nature, that we stop bickering about the BS, and we do become almost, in a way, that libertarian society. People are like, oh, you don't have your utopia, there's looting and all. Okay, the libertarian's not a utopia. It's a belief, that there's no, king or a ruler. That basic morals and, the understanding of actual rights kind of plays the pivotal role in that. It's pretty interesting when you look at these type of devastation. You look at it and it just shows, what society does. And we've seen instances where the government comes in and goes, we got control of this. You can't do anything without our approval. And they get in the way. They muck everything up. They take forever to get things done. But when the people are able, and I think Houston was able to do this in the way they did it for the simple fact that the problem was so huge. It was so out of control. So they had to let people come in and, help do the work and rescue people. And they couldn't go, oh, we'll take care of it all. Nor I think they would want to do that. This is Texas we're talking about too. So I think it was a, lack of a better term, perfect storm for that libertarian, just you take care of it yourself. You don't ask other people, the government to come in and take from one person and give to you. They're going to give to you. When you need help, the help is usually there. That's been proven through history. Governments always like to take the credit for a lot of things that they came in after the fact. I want to get into the end of DACA, since the mainstream media is covering this so heavily. I'm going to play this clip here from Stefan Molyneux, and we'll discuss it here after the end of DACA, or is it?
It's like DACA is done. This is the 2012 Obama Caligula-style decree, deferred action for childhood arrivals, which was an executive order that protected certain illegal aliens to the U.S. who entered the country as children from being deported. It was a kind of soft amnesty and an attempt to pass some kind of amnesty for kids of illegal immigrants had been suggested or proposed. It failed. And so Obama basically said, well, I want it. There's a lot of lobbying for it. So if Congress doesn't give me what I want, then I'm just going to write an executive order. And so this has been in effect for 5 years. That means people have made decisions and embedded themselves in this executive order. And I guess it is, of course, pretty banana republic style for El Presidente to just say, well, Congress didn't do what I wanted, so I'm just going to do it for myself with edict. As you know, of course, the president does not have the authority to pass laws. So Jeff Sessions, of course, has announced that DACA is going to be rescinded. States are suing the federal government about it, and it is unconstitutional. There were rumors of a 6-month delay in enforcement. That hasn't emerged, at least from this speech. There's some kind of ill-defined transition period, which is kind of weird to me, because if something is blatantly illegal and unconstitutional, isn't the delay also blatantly illegal and unconstitutional? And Trump has said that Congress needs to do its job. What that is, I don't know. Does that mean that, well, we have to get rid of DACA because it's unconstitutional, but you need to do your job? Meaning what? Pass another amnesty, pass something similar to DACA that extends things? I don't know. I mean, if they do that and the law ends up on his desk, will Trump sign it? He does have a bit of a weakness of wanting to be perceived as the nice guy and wanting to be popular. Not uncommon in somebody who's a public figure. But if he signs it, well, that just means that another wave of illegal immigrants will receive a path to citizenship or some sort of deferral on deportation, which is going to fundamentally change the demographics of the United States. As we all know, 4 out of 5 Hispanics vote for large government. That means that no genuinely small government candidate will ever win the presidency again. And so you're going to just have to have the wolves in sheep's clothing, the globalists who wallpaper themselves with the road to serfdom, only rhinos. And so that is one big concern. And people are surprised that it came to an end. But of course, DACA, it means deferred. If you defer a payment, doesn't mean you never have to pay it. And if you defer deportation, doesn't mean it's never going to happen. Now, Congress may attempt to do, as they have done a number of times before, until their switchboards lit up with angry voters, pass some form of path to citizenship, extension of DACA, some sort of amnesty. I don't see how that's possible with the midterms coming up, but it would represent a significant betrayal by those in the Republican Party of their voters who have been desperate for control over the borders and a reduction in immigration for decades. Now, it's weird, too, when you think about it. So this terrible, unlawful, unconstitutional action was signed into effect by Obama. Now, he can't claim ignorance of the law. He was supposed to be some kind of constitutional expert. What are the negative consequences? You did something completely unconstitutional. If I do something against the law, you do something against the law, aren't there consequences? If a president does something against the law, well, I guess Richard Nixon was right. It's not illegal if you are the president, at least if you're a president on the left. Now, the goal, of course, of DACA was to just stuff the ballot box. Of course, you know, if you're illegal, you're a child of someone, you can't vote. But there may be extended family who's going to have interest in it. If your parents are illegal, then they can't vote. According to theory, I have actually little to no faith in the integrity of the electoral process in the U.S. There's evidence of millions of illegal voting and the pushback from the states just for the basic idea of verification on the ground, some sort of government-issued ID in order to vote. The pushback is insane from the states just to get some basic verification on the ground. So that, to me, means that they are relying to a significant degree on the votes of illegals. So, yeah, there's no punishment for signing an edict that turned out to be illegal and unconstitutional, which is like the worst kind of illegal that there is. There's no punishment. You know, keep your emails in your server by your toilet, no punishment. Globalists don't care about law and order. They care about power and control. So the 800,000 or so people who are covered under this DACA executive order just rescinded. The argument is, of course, and it's very much a consequentialist argument, but they're really good for the economy, you see. They're good for the economy. They stimulate demand. They spend money and so on. I got to tell you, the Mexican government is as hungry for income as every other government. If these people were so economically productive that they produced double or triple or 5 times in taxes than they consumed in services, there already would be a wall. It would have been built by Mexico to keep such productive tax livestock within the country. The fact that Mexico lets them cross, the fact that Mexico in the past has published pamphlets giving people instructions on how to cross and what to do if they're caught, means that I think the Mexican government is very keen to have these people illegal immigrants as a whole, not in Mexico. And, of course, we also know that if illegal immigrants voted for Republicans, the Democrats would already have built a wall visible from the moon, but they don't want to stop the flow of potential voters. So if these people are the lottery ticket of massive economic productivity that some people claim, it seems hard to imagine that Mexico, as far as illegal immigrants as a whole and dreamers as a subset, would be very keen to let them go. You don't give away your winning lottery ticket. You hold on to it with your fists. The way, of course, that they're considered to be good for the economy is this weird GDP measure, where if money changes hands, that's a GDP measure, not whether it's actually productive, good for the economy, or good for the future of the country. If a woman stays home raising her kids, well, that's bad for the economy, you see. If she dumps her kids in daycare or hires someone to take care of them and goes out to work, well, that's really, really good for the economy. Divorce is really, really good for the economy. Bad for the environment, good for the economy, because now you need 2 houses and cars driving back and forth. Lots of money gets spent. If you get cancer, fantastic for the economy. You spend a lot of money. Jails, also good for the economy. And, if you have a serial killer in your town, good for the economy, you see, because lots of overtime for the cops who will then spend that money in the town. So it's a terrible measure. All of this illegal immigration, it's good for Democrat votes. It's good for lawyers and special interest groups. You pay, of course, in general. So these dreamers, of course, are now largely grown up, and significantly a lot of them have grown up. So either they're on welfare, in which case that's bad for the economy, or they're taking jobs from Americans, driving down wages, thus making welfare more attractive or disability more attractive than working. Now, I understand it's not like jobs are just this fixed pie and one person gets a piece and someone else doesn't. But job growth has been so strangled by the hyper-regulation of the modern state, and this really happened a lot under Obama. It's entered into this French-style territory where it's really hard to create jobs. And so Trump is, of course, trying to jumpstart job growth through deregulation. But right now there is, unfortunately, because of government control of the economy, a limit on the number of jobs that can be created. And if other people are taking them, it's driving down wages and reducing the incentive to work for the most vulnerable of Americans. And it's funny, too, because up until relatively recently, this sort of protection of the working class used to be a cornerstone of the Democratic Party. Protect the U.S. worker. They sometimes went too far in terms of protectionism and in terms of union protections, but protecting the U.S. worker was very key. But now, of course, that third world immigration has swelled the ranks of the Democrat voting base. Now they don't care that much about the workers, and they're just pandering to immigrants, both legal and illegal, since the 1965 Act. And so this is a real mess. And it's hard to know exactly what's going to happen. We'll certainly keep on it. But I will say this, that in general, there's a principle in law, in common law, fruit of the poisonous tree. It means if you steal $1 million from the bank and you give that $1 million to your children, they don't get to keep it, right? That the fruits of a crime are tainted by the crime and must be returned to their lawful owner, the fruit of the poisonous tree. And citizenship, of course, is just another value. And so the idea, this is true for birthright, citizenship, and the deferral. I know it's not citizenship, but the deferral under DACA. If stuff is obtained illegally, how can it be transferred and become legal? That is, to me, a very strange concept. It doesn't really show up anywhere else except in Democratic talking points regarding immigration. And this whole immigration thing, it's so incomprehensible as a whole. I mean, phone up embassies around the world and ask how you gain citizenship in other people's countries. It is a huge lower intestine navigation of a Mobius strip. It is just crazy blizzards of, Robert De Niro eating paperwork that is required to go get a citizenship in another country, except in the West. Except you can just wander across borders and at least get a chance to stay. And it's nowhere else. I mean, just imagine a bunch of whites go down to Mexico, demanding free healthcare, free education, welfare. They wave their American flags in Mexico, sing the American national anthem all the time. And if they don't get what they want when they want it from the Mexican government, they're going to attack cops, they're going to block traffic, they're going to riot and threaten and then end up suing the Mexican government. Can you imagine what the Mexican government would do to such people? Now, of course, in Cuck Planet Fantastico, there is a GOP politician who's making the argument kids should not be guilty for the actions of their parents. They should not be morally responsible for the actions of their parents. Well, okay, sure. You don't, like if you've got some guy who scams a bunch of investors, then the kids shouldn't go to jail, but that doesn't mean that the kids get to keep the proceeds of that crime, work permits or continuation of status in a country. And the idea kids are not responsible for the moral choices of their parents, well, I guess he's never heard of the national debt or whites being blamed for slavery. So it is I want to point out that this is a really heartbreaking and terrible and horrible situation. It's an ugly mess, which is exactly why it should never have been an executive order in the first place. So there are people who are going to face real challenges from this. And I sympathize. I think it's absolutely terrible. And they should be angry. They should be angry at their parents for bringing them to a country illegally, or at least at the time. They should be mad at Obama for passing this legislation and allowing for a continuation of a fundamentally uncontinuable program. But the idea you're going to get mad at people who are attempting to restore the rule of law after the late Roman Empire style rules of Obama, well, if you don't have any rules, you don't have a country, you don't have a culture, you don't really have anything. And basically the U.S. has no money. I mean, the fact that Obama's going to say, sure, coming in, there'll be lots of welfare, 65,000 illegal immigrants graduate from high school every year in the United States. You've got tons of this stuff. There's no money. There's no money left in the West. It's all borrowed and credit and printed and made up fiat crap. So when people say, well, you should come in, we've got all this money, we'll spend it on you and you'll do really well, it's inviting people into an utterly unsustainable situation, which is incredibly, incredibly dangerous. Now, this idea that any sort of path to citizenship or any sort of continuation of DACA is going to do anything other than provoke more illegal immigration, I mean, it's ridiculous. Right, 1986, there was an Immigration Reform and Control Act. Ronald Reagan signed it. In November of 86, it granted him amnesty to about 3 million illegal immigrants in the United States. And then the problem was solved forever. Of course not. What did the Reagan amnesty do? Well, it gave California to the Democrat Party forever. Now, he, of course, offered this up to the Dems in return for border controls and some sort of primitive E-Verify or employment verification program, which never came to pass, of course. So here are the incentives and consequences you need to understand. You have a rich country sitting on top of a poor country. And that's all feasible if you have no welfare state. You can have open borders or you can have a welfare state. You can't have both. Like you can pile gold in your house, but then you need an alarm system and you need a security guard and you need to at least lock your doors. Or if your house is worthless, like your outhouse, you don't need a lock on it at all. But if you have a lot of money that's available for people who make it into your country through the welfare state, then you need borders and you need border enforcement. This is an old argument. It's not mine. It goes way back in free market circles. And you don't have that situation at the moment. At the moment, you have massive incentives for people to come in. And what happens is Mexico, of course, has a massive incentive for these people to come to the U.S. Why? Because they either get welfare or they make money or something like that. And then what they do is they send billions and billions and billions of dollars into Mexico. So the Mexican government has money cascading in, flowing in, tsunamiing into the country, and they don't have to provide $1 worth of services because the people are all in America. So it's income into the economy, income into Mexico without having to provide services. So they're just planting the crops of illegal immigration in America, and they're reaping the rewards of often taxpayer-funded remittances back down to Mexico. It's a mess. And what is all of this? You know, the estimates of like 30 million illegal immigrants in America. This is just the fault of both parties who failed to enforce immigration law for decades. Just kicking the can down the road, deferring, not wanting to be called racist, not wanting to deal with the issue. Like, that's not what they're paid for. It's like the national debt. It's like unfunded pension liabilities or the unfunded liabilities for social security or other things. Just kicking the can down the road. And it's horrible stuff. But this is what happens when you defer problems. You know, you got a lump in your body and you don't go to the doctor for a year, you're probably going to be worse off. You know, deferring makes things worse. Appeasement makes things worse. That was one of the terrible lessons of the 20th century. And of course, it's going to be painful to see what's going to happen. This is why this stuff shouldn't be done in the first place. It's tough to quit heroin. That's why you shouldn't start heroin in the first place. It's tough to quit smoking. That's why you shouldn't start smoking in the first place. And it's tough to enforce the Constitution after 5 years of lawlessness in this area. It's going to be very tough. It's going to be heartbreaking. It's going to be difficult. And that should give people the resolution to not have this kind of stuff happen again in the future. Because right now, we're talking about adults for the most part. And the question is, now that the executive action has been proven, or at least has been strongly suggested as unconstitutional, what does it mean? Is anyone going to respect the law? Because this is what it comes down to. The rules are where you live. The rules are your culture. The rules are your values. The rules are your ethics. And appeasement undermines and destroys everything. So you can have a country. You can have a future. Or you can just have a shrinking cage of cowardice.
Stefan Molyneux. Check him out on YouTube. Subscribe. Now, I got something that kind of covers some of what he covered. In this one, you can find this one at Libertarian Republic. 4 things you should know about the DACA debacle. And, you know, one of the main things, and he brought it up in that, was the simple fact Obama didn't actually have the authority to institute it in the first place. He was trying to use executive order to write law. And I'll get into this article here. It says DACA has been dominating political news recently, although there may be many angles and spins used by pundits. We should first familiarize ourselves with the basics. Number 1, Obama didn't actually have the authority to unilaterally institute it in the first place. Well, maybe. On the one hand, this can be seen as a classic case of legislating from the executive branch. After all, he merely announced the program into existence during his speech in the Rose Garden. He brazenly listed it as a reason he created it, unilaterally that he had asked Congress to pass a bill addressing his priority, and they refused to. That inaction from Congress somehow gave him the power to act without them. In Obama's defense, the DACA program does share many similarities with um, prosecutorial discretion. Um, in essence, it could be argued that DACA is little more than a refusal to prosecute by prioritizing other crimes and directing resources to more important matters. This is a relatively common practice. For instance, a president might decide not to waste resources pursuing every individual pot user when doing so is a violation of federal law, and instead focus on other federal crimes that include things like the presence of a victim. The question at hand is essentially whether DACA violated the Take Care Clause. The president shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed of Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution, or whether this is akin to the implication of prosecutorial discretion implied, among other things, in the presidential power of the pardon. Many who support DACA and oppose the president have made the comparison between the relative merits of mercy shown towards so-called dreamers and Trump's pardon of Aparo. Among those who believe this was a case of the executive branch writing legislation, there's enough aspects of the program to point to, including an application process, such as a process requiring funding when Congress has both the sole power to pass legislation, which DACA does qualify as in nearly every respect, and the power of the purse. It could be argued that the program is primarily self-funded through application fees, but that argument essentially amounts to normalizing legal bribery. After all, those who are technically in violation of federal law are being asked to pay money to the executive in the hope that doing so will incentivize it not to prosecute. The money raised through application fees is designed explicitly to avoid congressional funding. It may not be a settled or easy issue to determine whether Obama had the authority to create this program in the first place. So what do the courts say? Well, an appeals court visited the issue and offered a preliminary injunction blocking the program, at least temporarily. Of course, the Obama administration protested a challenge to its power and a reversal of its decree, and the case found its way to the Supreme Court in the United States versus Texas. However, by the time it got there, Scalia was dead, and Gorsuch had not yet been confirmed. Supreme Court of the United States was split right up the middle in a deadlock 4-4 decision, which let the lower court ruling stand. After the trial by the lower court, there is a chance it'll end up back to the Supreme Court, where most expect Gorsuch to be the deciding vote, striking it down. Number two, however, in terms of policy desirability, it was better than what existed beforehand. It's hard to view DACA as such more than an extension of the birthright citizenship debate. As I understand the main competing arguments, one side says that children shouldn't be held responsible or culpable as a minor for being brought here, when they had no real control over the decision themselves. The other side argues that such policies as birthright citizenship and, to a much lesser extent, programs like DACA designed to protect these children offer more incentive for non-citizen parents to choose illegal migration. Before even looking into the numbers that say what effect these policies actually have on immigration rates, the ways in which deportation punishes those who have only ever known our country, how even whether migration of families specifically is a negative or a net benefit to this country, or issues of law about who sets immigration policy. It seems the easy calculation is whether or not it's worth punishing children or adults brought here as children for the actions of their parents in order to make America a less attractive option for others who might come illegally. It's hard to view this as a hard choice to decide whether or not such a price is actually worth it. And that's even after the benefit of the doubt is given that such a this instinctive structure is actually effective. Conservatives often make the case when it comes to issues related to welfare programs that the individual should be given more credit. That when welfare spending is excessive, it breeds dependency in those who could otherwise be self-sufficient. That a lack of non-potential but effort can be found in some who are caught in a system which effectively helps to keep them poor rather than aid in lifting them out of poverty by perverting the incentive structure that would naturally be present in society and the market. In effect, excessive welfare is seen to subsidize poverty rather than elevate or minimize it, precisely because individuals and non-government societal structures are more capable and they are given credit for. If this is true, it can only ever apply to mentally competent adults who are expected to be able to achieve self-sufficiency. Most hindrances to growth are more akin to bad choices than the individual was responsible for. Such responsibility cannot be transferred to children, and blame cannot be inherited. In other words, the sins of the father should not be visited upon innocent children. And it goes on in that one. And the next two is, with Trump given a 6-month window for shutting it down, Congress has the opportunity to do the right thing right away. This doesn't guarantee they will, is number 4. Now, I have many issues with this whole thing. One is the whole welfare. If you cut welfare out, most of these incentives would not exist. If you cut out birthright citizenship, most of the incentive wouldn't be there as much. Because we do have people that come, they're willing to work hard, but we also have people that know, I could go here, get, have my kid here, and then I can basically get the health care I need. And, I wouldn't have a problem with that if someone was willing to support that, birth. But then they could support it in Mexico, too. I have a problem because I make my own choices, and I should not have to be paying for other people's choices. We already have that problem here. But to extend that to people from outside of our own country, I'm not ready for the burden of taking care of everybody's kids that the adults are making the wrong choice. I'm not saying punish the kids for the sins of their parents, but if I want to help someone, let me help them in the way I believe they should be helped, not put them into a system that I personally seen the people that are growing up in that system are also in that system now. So I don't want to hear, welfare helps people out of the system. It's raising multiple generations where I'm now seeing the kids of people that were a few grades ahead of me that are now turning, 18, 19 and talking about, I got to get food stamps and, got another baby on the, I'm like, okay, I know that mother was also on food stamps when they had you. Their mother was on food stamps when they had her. Okay. This is now a trend. Not saying it happens to everyone. Not saying everyone does it, but I see a trend. To a point when I was looking for a job, I was constantly getting asked, did you apply for food stamps? Did you apply for food stamps? No. Oh, you could get them. I don't want them. I work for my money. I don't want handouts. I don't like handouts. I'm that type of person. I don't want to be dependent on someone else. And dependency becomes a drug. Why would you work harder to make less? I don't dip in that fruit. So I don't know what more for free. Unless other than you having to check in with Big Daddy over there called government all the time. And I've known also people that they play the system. Because they grew up on food stamps. They never seen their parents work hard. And again, this is not everyone. There's a lot of friends that I cut off just because, they were friends back in, school, but I'm not going to surround my people or myself by people that don't want to, better themselves. Just, it doesn't inspire me. It doesn't put a great look on where society's going for me. I'd be bummed out if I surrounded myself by people like that. The friends I have around are people that are ambitious, creative, always thinking, how to better themselves, better their situation if they're not in the greatest situation. And when they get in a better situation, they try to prioritize moral happiness and, extent of energy. Some of them don't have a inkling to be rich. They want to be comfortable. And they're trying to play it smart and, have money saved back. Not everything's on a credit card or a loan. we kind of joke around and call. I do old school. I don't pay unless I have cash. Now for homes, it's kind of hard to do that. But like even vehicles, I save up money. I don't do car loan. I did that when I was young, and learned my lesson. Just I'm not going down that path again. Um, I think that when you create a atmosphere where there's a ability to come to this country legally, you either have to be sponsored or be able to provide for yourself. Can't be, broke, come walking across and expect to be given free housing, free food. Now, if someone wants to sponsor you or a church you can go to, guess what? If we just allowed the doors open and churches try to do that, they would be swarmed and would have to stop. And that's usually the argument why we shouldn't, let private organizations deal with it. Why? Because they have the good heart that they actually wanted to do it for as many people as possible, but realize that when you give out free stuff, people just come and expect free stuff. I used to always look for the free stuff when I was young, and then I got to a point where, well, sometimes the free stuff isn't worth, getting it for free. You used to do contract, cell phone because I got my phone for free. I don't do that no more. I pay outright for my phone, and I pay really little amount a month. And I have a smartphone. I get my data. I got a really good deal. Except I paid it outright for my phone. But guess what? I don't get those, overages, those little secret charges. I did that before. You find out why the phone's free because they'll get their money in the end. Things that are free come with a cost. Sometimes that cost can be really, really high. And the thing about it is, a lot of these people end up paying the cost that get in these welfare programs because they get stuck in it. Then you are also paying a cost because your money or the amount of debt that the country takes on becomes your problem because you're willing to work. You're willing not to take the benefits, but you, of course, keep paying your taxes. I always said, Congress hasn't been doing the will of the people. They've been doing their own agenda and using propaganda through these organizations they're affiliated with and people like George Soros. So they're no longer passing laws. So any of this debt that has been created over the decades, I think that should be put on the Congress. People are like, well, this Congress didn't do it. Well, no, but they're the ones not fixing the problem. They're the ones continuing the problem. They've made this their problem. Um, real quick one from Reason.com. Dumping DACA will likely alter Census 2020 in ways favorable to Donald Trump. Today's controversial announcement by Attorney General Jeff Sessions that Trump administration in 6 months will rescind the Deferred Action on Childhood Arrivals program comes with a government information sharing follow-up that could have wide-ranging effects on immigrant communities' cooperation or lack thereof with representatives from the state. According to Betsy Woodruff at the Daily Beast, the Department of Homeland Security released a memo today making clear that immigration and customs enforcement officers will be able to use DACA recipients' personal information to deport them, meaning the people who voluntarily handed over their sensitive particulars to the federal government in the hopes of qualifying for non-deportation and a worker's permit may now see the same data used to boot them out of the country. Information provided to the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services in DACA requests will not be proactively provided to Immigration and Customs Enforcement and Customs and Border Protection for the purpose of immigration enforcement proceedings unless the requester meets the criteria for the issuance of a notice to appear or referral to ICE under the criteria set forth in USCIS Notice to Appear guidance. The statement read, more from Woodruff, they're saying we will not give your information unless ICE tells USCIS they need it to deport you, which basically means we'll give your information out whenever ICE says it's necessary to deport you, said Leon Fresco, an immigration attorney who represents many DACA recipients. That's the point. Now, I would say that ICE would have to already know you're in the country illegally and that you've been through the system in some way, you've been arrested or something like that. I think they would have to already be hunting you down and need to know your current location. Or were, coming after you and then you did a DACA and got a work permit, whatever. I think that what's going to happen really with this whole deal is a bill is going to be drawn up. It's going to allow the DACA recipients to continue to work here. But in return, I think Trump's going to get funding for the wall or some type of reassurance. It's going to be another Reagan bill. Maybe not at the full extent of amnesty. I don't know. We'll see what comes out of it. But it will probably be a give and take type deal. We'll give you the funding for the wall, but you're going to, we're going to take the DACA recipients and continue to allow that to go on. But we'll see. We'll see. Okay. Give me a second here. If this works out here. Maybe I should go liquid cooled sometime. Okay. I wanted to get into this little debate that what type of debate this really is, but Marxism versus capitalism. And this was Lawrence Southern with Stefan Molyneux. And with all the propaganda calling what we have right now capitalism, I think is disingenuous. What we have right now is corporatism, which is passed off as capitalism because, well, if you actually believe in free market capitalism, you might like capitalism a little bit. It allows you to gain wealth, and people that work hard tend to get more, but we know that to not be quite as true. Where corporatism, where they make it harder for you to do what they do, and it kind of ensures their ability to stay at the top. And there's when you talk, people are like, well, you talk about businesses and people fail all the time. I don't think the Rockefellers lost their money. I'm sure the Rothschilds are still rich. The Queen of England, the monarchy there, they've held on to theirs. Laws and extremely large corporations, you tend to see, the people at the very, very, very top, the people behind the shadows, they don't get hurt. It's the people in the public eye that you see disappear, new people put in, just kind of like our government. Same thing happens, just new people get put in after old people get taken off. But we also have the alt-left pushing, Marxism and communism, which they want a Marxist society with a communistic government, and they're against fascists. Well, guess what? You both are pretty close on the spectrum of freedom and no freedom. And you're closer to no freedom under both. So I'm not going to play this whole thing, but I do want to play part of it and discuss it. And then I also have a little economic news I want to cover before the end of the broadcast. So I want to hurry up and dive into this before we get too late into this hour. So here we go. Marxism versus capitalism with Lawrence Southern and Stefan Molyneux.
Of my new book, The Art of the Argument, which you can get a hold of at theartoftheargument.com. I am having a series of debates, and these are very intense, passionate, and powerful debates showing the art of the argument in action. What are you doing today?
I'm very well.
Good,
how are you
good.
doing over there, capitalist pig? Oink, oink.
Well, I'm using these skulls of workers as the steps to my studio. So this, of course, is wonderful for me. So we're going to have a debate. Now, I've released a book recently called The Art of the Argument, which you can get at artoftheargument.com. And in it, I'm setting up a series of debates. And this is going to be a mock debate, but there may be people out there, Lauren, who have some suspicion about how well you can argue the communist side. So let's get a little bit of your creds for the Reds.
All right. So first of all, I'd like to start with even within my own personal real life of supporting more libertarian policies, I think we vastly overestimate the ability of the free market to solve all our problems. We've got libertarians that come out and say, just let the free market run amok. It'll solve all our issues. It'll solve everything, which is a complete lie, of course. If we just had the free market and no government and no borders, well, you'd, of course, have all of the issues that both you and I complain about often with people coming in the country and completely changing the culture and making it a caliphate per se. And a few farmers who can hardly organize a libertarian convention without disagreeing and stripping on a stage are not going to be able to put together an army to back that off. Now, simply on the topic of capitalism, I do think we are too quick to dismiss the ideas and critiques of someone like Karl Marx, who saw a lot of issues with the idea of people just working 8 hours a day and having no leisure, having no life, having no enjoyment. iPhones are great and all. It's great and all to be able to have a piece of technology covered in the tears of Chinese 6-year-olds that's going to become obsolete in 3 months. But we seem to have forgotten about the more meaningful things in life, our souls, our passion, our leisure time. I thought one of the greatest arguments that Karl Marx actually had for feminism is he asked feminists why would they beg to be in the workforce with men to have equality? Why would they not want to bring men to the joy that they have? One of the happiest roles in the world being the mother who can have leisure time, take care of her children, be with her family, learn hobbies, do arts, painting, all of these great, wonderful things. Whereas men are stuck to be working in factories where they're stuck to be working 8, 9, 10 hours a day. Why not say men shouldn't be put into this suffering as well? Join us in our leisure. Us as humans have lost many of the great things that we had. I think a lot of our spiritual side is gone. I think a lot of the pleasures in the arts that we had before. I mean, we've seen a massive decline in the arts and just the ability of the average human to do something like dancing. People can't dance anymore. They can't paint. They can't sing. They can't do all of the things that humans should do. They don't spend time with their family. And it's because we have just succumbed fully to this entirely materialistic, capitalistic society where it's all about making that buck, whether it's $8 an hour, and getting the next meaningless thing. And it's been proven psychologically that choice does not make people more happy. So just because we have more trinkets to go around, it doesn't make people more happy. And capitalism is entirely based off the idea of people being miserable. You don't go and participate in the free market unless you need something, unless you want something to fulfill you. If you're perfectly happy at your house, gardening your plants, spending time with your family, fulfilling yourself or with your community, then you don't need the market. The market is entirely about making people miserable, making them feel inadequate, making them feel like they need that next thing, that new iPhone, that new clothes, all of this. I don't think capitalism makes people happy. I think it's made them utterly miserable and taken away from the meaningful things in life, like the arts, time with family, and the spiritual.
Now, I guess I would respond with, can you give a brother a definition of capitalism that we can work with?
A definition of capitalism.
It is one of these big magical buckets wherein people project a lot of things, a lot of emotions, a lot of ideas, a lot of resentments. So as far as, the pro-communist position goes, what is the definition of capitalism that you're working with?
Well, I think like communism and like Marxism, capitalism also has been given a bad rap by wrongful kind of perceptions of it. We haven't really had real capitalism in the West in a long time, that's for sure, which is why I would consider capitalism just as utopian of an idea as perfect communism, because no matter what happens, the capitalists and the people who are the powerful, whether they be in government or in the markets, they will work together and coerce. So the capitalism we have now obviously is crony capitalism, where you have people in the markets working with the government. But even simply the idea of just the totally free market, completely unregulated, I am arguing against that. Capitalism, just the free trade of goods between people.
Right. Now, you started off with a critique of culture.
Yeah.
Do you think that government schools have a fair amount to do with how people turn out? I mean, the governments get children, sometimes from, 8 minutes after they get out of the womb and so on, but they get, from pre-K to kindergarten to primary school and junior high and high school and so on, and then sometimes off all the way to university. So government schools are run on a socialistic principle. From each according to their ability, those who pay taxes, particularly property taxes, go to fund schools, which then shape the hearts, minds, and perhaps, as you described, soullessness of the children. So it seems to me that if you're going to start critiquing people's spiritual malaises, would you not think that it is, say, the first 15 years of their fairly full-time government indoctrination that might have something to do with how they turn out, and a little bit less an ad that they see somewhere on a website for an iPhone?
Well, actually, I think one of the biggest problems with schools is they are based and built off of the capitalist system, especially during the Industrial Revolution when schools came about. They were entirely built off the idea of you go into your class and the bell rings, then you go and have your lunch, then you go into your next class, very menial things you do. Everyone knows that modern schooling is based off the factory work setting. I think most communists and Marxists would agree that we need a complete revitalization of our schooling to be a place of more arts and culture, and that it is this capitalist-based system that we have schools teaching you to be a factory worker, teaching you to go entirely into the capitalist system and not to be creative and think on your own. One day you could be a poet, one day you could be a hunter, one day you could be all these different things. We don't have that in schooling now. We just have this entire indoctrination. And this is the thing as well. I'm not saying, and I don't think many Marxists are saying, that they 100% have the answer to the problem. It's just these capitalists think that they have the answer, and they think that capitalism is the answer when they don't realize that it deeply, deeply needs to be critiqued, and it has deep issues. And it's a matter of finding out what the cure to that is and updating our schooling, updating our government, changing it for the better. Because no matter what you guys want, anarchists, capitalists, whatever, no matter what you want, it's not going away. The government is not going away anytime soon. Neither are schools. So we better find a way to make it more cultured and better so that we can have more meaningful lives. Otherwise, we're just going to be sitting here having circle jerks in Facebook discussion groups all day like book club libertarians and anarchists tend to do.
You have really taken me on a journey here, my sister. Oh, man. Okay. So you say that there's something culturally wrong, spiritually wrong, artistically wrong, that there's a malaise of the soul within the capitalist environment. I point out that the primary influence on children, more so than their parents. Kids spend more times in government schools than their parents. The government schools are not in any way, shape, or form organized along free market principles. You're forced to pay in many places. You're forced to go. And if you don't go, you're forced to pay even still. There's no quality control. People can't get fired. There's no particular return on investment. It's not part of the free market at all. So if you're going to start to blame the free market situation when the very center of culture, replace the church, replace the family, replace communities, the very center of that which shapes people in this supposed capitalist environment is a socialist/communist indoctrination center called government schools, you're going to have to come up with a slightly better reply than they have bells just like factories do. That is not a very good argument, I must say.
Right, and you think completely capitalist-based schools are going to work out just fine. People are going to go into class and they're going to have their sponsored test TM by Apple, and all of the answers are going to be how great iPhones are, and all of their essays are going to have to be written about McDonald's. Like, do you really think that corporate-sponsored schools are going to be A-okay? And what about the population that can't afford to send their children to schooling? What are we going to do about that?
Oh, so do you care about people who can't educate their children? Do you care about those people?
Yes, absolutely. And I think we as a society, I am so tired of this idea from the right wing and the anarchist types who believe that we just have no responsibility. It's entirely individualism, entirely but freedom. No, you have more you need to give to this world. You have a responsibility to this world. Just saying you're going to check out and everyone should just have their freedom is a lazy, irresponsible, and entirely immoral viewpoint in my mind. You have a moral responsibility to others, and you have to contribute to this world.
Agreed. So I
disagree. No one has a responsibility to give to anybody or the world. They want to go sit in a closet somewhere and not give any of themselves to the world. That's their choice. You can't force someone to give. Just like you can't force a doctor to do surgery. Well, you get if you hold a gun, well then that's not freedom. And then when you, the plumber that held the gun to the doctor and told him to, you do surgery on your wife, well then when someone holds a gun to your head because they want their shitter to work and you're a plumber, guess what? You made that choice. You said that was okay to force someone to use their abilities. So no, you don't have a responsibility, because a responsibility would mean that you have to do that. That's something that you're supposed to do, and if you don't do it, you're being a bad person. Well, that's opinion. I think a lot of people that go out to help everybody are being bad people. You know, the saying that, you know, love kills. You can love a dog, doesn't mean you know how to do the surgery. Oh, I love my dog. I got a knife here. I'll cut that out. Yep. No. Love can kill. Love without knowledge behind it can kill. So, you know, you don't have a responsibility. You have a responsibility to yourself. And when I think when you do put that responsibility onto yourself, as I do, you're someone that just naturally helps people. It's not a responsibility. I like being that person because I like people around me, but only to a point if they're willing to help themselves. Because I also know I don't have a responsibility to continue to help people that won't help themselves. I don't have that responsibility. I don't have a responsibility to do a radio broadcast. I don't have a responsibility to go out here and fix someone's car. I stopped working on cars. Why? Because I got tired of it. It just, you have people that bring in pieces of junk to get one thing done, and everything that breaks on the car after that's your fault. And, you know, so many different automotive shops everywhere, and it was just too much. I spent a lot of money on tools, and if you know a mechanic or been a mechanic, you know what they have in their tools. Lots of money. But if I see someone broke down on the side of the road, I don't have a responsibility for. Sometimes I can't, even though I know how to work on a car, because the resources are out there that they can get the help they need. But if I have the ability, if I have tools on me, I'll probably pull over and see if I can help them. So I think responsibility and, you know, doing a good deed are two different things. You can't say doing good deeds is everybody's responsibility. You have a responsibility to yourself first. And I think after that, it makes it easier when you are self-responsible to help other people out. Back to the clip.
Many decades been talking to people about not having government-run schools. Because lo and behold, when you have government-run schools, they end up being run not for the children, but for the government. Boy, talk about exploitation. You know, these are helpless children trapped into these indoctrination camps. Their parents are forced to pay, and they're run for the benefits of governments. They're run for the benefits of teachers. They're run as big, giant vote-getting machines for leftist policies, and they're also run as big, giant conduits to get money from unionized teachers all the way through to leftist political parties. They're not run for the benefit of the children at all. Now, for years, I've been making this case. And you know what the first thing is that people say? Oh, my communist friend. The first thing that people say is, what about the poor who can't afford to get their kids educated? Two answers. Number one, they're not getting educated right now. Number two, you care about them. I care about them. Hundreds and hundreds of people I've talked about over the decades care about them. Democracy says we care about them because everyone votes to put these schools in. So we don't need the government and all of this indoctrination and all of this coercion at the center of children's education. People care about other people's kids getting educated. And so those kids will get educated, whether they get educated over the internet, whether they get educated in an airplane hangar, whether they're at tutors, whether it's someone's garage. Those kids will get educated because when we don't have the government to force us to do things, we have a great wonderful field of voluntary flowers that grow up in order to fill the void. And we know that's the case. I know that's the case because everybody has the same concern. And I don't think that they're all just lying about it.
Right. And you really think they're going to be educated great on the internet, where you've got Google controlling what everyone sees, where they're going to be on the mainstream internet that has your viewpoints censored from it? They're certainly not going to be saying the arguments you want them to see.
I see what your concern is, Lauren. Your concern, if I understand this correctly, and please correct me where I've gone astray, your concern is this. You're concerned that there may be one large, significant influencer of what children are exposed to. Now, for you, that's Google. For me, that's the government. Let's just look at the two differences here. Does anyone force you to use Google? Absolutely not. Does people force you to pay for government schools? Absolutely they do. Do you have free alternatives to Google that are both either anonymous or have different algorithms, so on? Lots of options. Can you create your own Google without Google throwing you in jail? Absolutely you can. Compare that to government schools, where it's often a single curriculum, politically motivated, you're forced to pay, it's very hard to put out competition, and this idea that I'm concerned Google's going to have a monopoly on information, that's government schools right there. If your concern is monopoly, forget about Google. It's infinitely more benevolent than your forced pay-to-play government education camps.
I think you're extremely naive to think that private schools would be any better at not serving just leftist doctrine than public schools. In fact, I did go to a private school when I was younger, and my parents switched me out of that school because it gave us entirely leftist doctrine, and they figured better not just pay for it, might as well get it for free. They started giving out communist distribution of the any candy that was won in games, any sports games, everything was distributed with participation trophies and everything, because that's where the culture went, Stefan. It doesn't matter what you think the free market is going to teach your kids. Where the culture is going is matters. And capitalism has destroyed our culture. It has made it entirely consumeristic. It has made it entirely based on materialism and making everyone feel good. You may think that the whole feel-good doctrine is coming from the government, but where are you seeing it come from? You're seeing private companies push it. You're seeing private companies and magazines and papers and thinkers all push this idea. I was pulled out of private schooling because the people that go into education tend to be left-wing. So my parents figured, better not pay for it, might as well get it for free. You're thinking that it would change if it were private.
Hang on a sec. I'd like to cover only 12 points before I get to respond to them, because otherwise I can't hold that much in my head. All right. So first of all, look at that. Your parents did not like what you were being taught in a private school. And look at that. They didn't have to fund it. They didn't have to pay for it. They had the choice to opt out. That's number one. So that's good. They voted with their dollars. And if enough people found it unpleasant or negative or destructive, they would vote with their dollars. Number one. Number two, of course, these private schools generally have to conform to government educational standards. And therefore, they're not really operating in the free market. Number three is that a lot of these people who run these schools with themselves educated in government schools, and I'm going to count higher education, particularly in Canada, but in other places as well, as largely a government-run and government-controlled entity. You do pay a little bit of your tuition, but they run pretty much according to government regulations and government union contracts. So this is not a free market situation, but what you're saying is your parents did not like the quality of what was being provided, and therefore they could withdraw their financial support. But that is what I'm talking about. Having that choice, having that option is so important, because there's no single person who knows how education should be run. Not you, not me, not some giant Borg brain, Alan Parsons, eye in the sky, phantasmagorical brain.
I want to also point out that why she had the option, because her parents had the money, she was able to go to the private school. But because what she doesn't realize is they're still paying for that public school. It wasn't free. You were paying for it when they were also paying for you to go to private school. Tax dollars were paying for that public school, so it wasn't free. It wasn't that, we'll just do it for free now. It's, we're already paying for this school. Why should we pay for the same thing from this private school that you can get from the public school? Sometimes the atmosphere is a little bit better in some private schools, but not many. They tend to push a little bit more ideology, which in a heavily leftist private school, I could see that getting a little out of control. But what about the poor people that their tax dollars are already going to the public school? They don't have the money to go, well, I think this school over here teaches a better ideology. Maybe they want their kid to, learn the Bible, so they want to send them to a private religious school, so they can get that extra class in that teaches them the Bible. Just an example. That the poor people don't have that option. So actually, the socialist system, the communist system that says you have to pay for this, and then, well, if you're rich enough, you can send them to a private school. Well, that system keeps the poor people into that type of schooling. So back to this clip.
Cloud of jellyfish neurons. There's no way anyone goes. There needs to be constant experimentation. There needs to be constant innovation to find out the best way. I don't know if school is the best way for kids to get it. I know that 150 years ago, when there was still somewhat of a free market in schools, you had a bunch of kids all sitting in a row, and you had a teacher with a blackboard. Now, massive upgrade, it's a teacher with a whiteboard. What's changed? Very little. And why has it not changed? Because the government has taken control of it, and therefore it becomes immune from market forces. No upgrades, no changes. I don't know. I have no clue about the best way to educate people. I have no clue about the best way to build a self-driving car. I have no clue about the best way to build a cell phone. But I know that there are people out there who, working together in a voluntary environment, can do all of that. And so the idea that we have any clue how children should best be educated, there's a central plan, a central way that we can force everyone to conform to that, and it's going to work, that is truly magical thinking. Nobody's that smart.
So it seems I've recognized my mistake a little too late here, but I've let you take me on your little magical path of talking about private schooling because it's easy turf for you, when Marxism isn't about private schooling, and it's not even about having a large government. It's about the workers' rights and the individual's rights. And in fact, at the end phase of Marxism, there is no government, just community. So I think we need to go and take a few steps back here. And for you, like I defined capitalism, I think you need to define Marxism for me.
Well, Marxism is, in general, government control of the means of production, and the government control is supposed to be moderated by workers' collectives, workers' communities who may have the chance to run factories themselves or run their own means of production. But it's the collectivization of profit, the redistribution of profit, and you only really have enforceable property rights in your toothbrush and your razor blade and your stockings, if you can find them in a communist country. The means of production, the really important stuff like, the factories and maybe the banks and so on, these are all managed and controlled by the government through central planning. And therefore, of course, there's supposed to be more money available to the workers because you don't have the greedy capitalists siphoning off all those tasty profits. You can redistribute them back out to the workers who have more control over their own lives, who have more control over what's happening, who are not just cogs in a machine, but are intellects at work doing the best they can with their entire humanity. And that is the best way to have a functioning and functional society.
Right. For someone else's profit. They're doing the best that they can, not for their own satisfaction or for their own profit, but so someone else can exploit them.
No, but in communism, they would be doing it. They would all get to keep and share that profit. That wouldn't be the capitalist siphoning it.
Right, but they wouldn't be alienated from their work. I want to ask you just entirely, aside from what we were just talking about, do you think that today people are happier? And do you think that people feel somewhat alienated from the work that they do? Do you think that they feel, since the Industrial Revolution, the craftsman who created a beautiful chair and took it and sold it to his neighbor for corn or whatever food, that pure capitalist, I made something that I care about and I believe in, and I'm going to trade it for goods with someone else, that doesn't exist anymore since the Industrial Revolution. People are simply cogs in a large machine and numbers on a checkboard. They feel alienated, and I'd like to hear you at least admit that.
First of all, I just wanted to point out, Lauren, this will make an excellent audition tape for CNN. I just wanted to point that out. We'll stitch all this together and keep that going. So as far as alienation goes, I understand the argument that you used to make a chair from soup to nuts, like from the very beginning all the way to the end, you'd get the wood, you'd cut it down, you'd put it all together, you'd polish it, you'd deliver it and so on. And therefore you had a full chair. And now you're like bolting on one leg, bolting on one leg, bolting on one leg and so on. Now, as far as whether that's good or bad, I don't know. Some people prefer to space out at work. I mean, you've known them, I've known them. We've both had boring jobs in our day. Fortunately, today is not one of them. But we both had boring jobs in our day. And there are some people who's like, yeah, I go to work, I completely space out, I listen to my 10cc album on my headphones, and then I just go home. I live to work. I don't.
No one
work.
enjoys that. They tolerate that, and no one
Sure.
pretending someone enjoys that is ridiculous. That is a meaningless existence, and people do that for 8 hours a day for their whole life. Just because you got lucky and got an amazing job where you got to do what you love doesn't mean that the other 90% of the population gets to do that. They are exploited by the big guys who run all the places they can work, who control the money that they can have, who control the goods that they can have, and they don't have a choice but to work some bullshit job that they're going to hate and is going to suck the life force out of them, and then to participate in a system that is so overabundant with goods that nothing is meaningful anymore. Nothing has value. No one has a purpose. They are simply a cog that a machine is going to replace one day. No one has purpose, and the goods they are buying have no purpose anymore.
Yeah, listen, I mean, there's still room for the craftspeople. You know, I go to country fairs and people make crap out of beeswax. I don't even know what the hell it's all about. Like they make bird shelters, they make mailboxes out of, I don't know, bones of warthogs. I mean, lots of they make their own jewelry, soup to nuts. There's lots of room for individual craftspeople still within the society. But, you know, here's the challenge. And the challenge occurs to some degree with an ever-increasing population, which is if you go to build your own chair from the beginning to the end, you know, maybe you sell that chair for, I don't know, $50, and it takes you a whole day to do it. Okay, so you've got some cost of materials and so on. Let's say you clear $30 out of your day. Now, if you are willing to go and just screw the leg of the chair in over to go, and you rotate out, people don't just stay on the same job the whole time, then you can get $100 or $200 a day instead, because it's just more efficient to have one person work on one part of it, to have people, because they tried this back in the day. Henry Ford originally had people swarming the Model T and just creating it back in the 1920s, right? The first mass-produced car, first mass-produced vehicle. He had people all swarm the car, and it was really inefficient. And what he then found, he put it on the assembly line. You put it on the conveyor belt, and people do their little bit, and then they cycle around, they move along. It's just a much more efficient way. And I don't know whether people should give up extra money in order to have a more fulfilling job, or whether they are willing to do a job that's more boring in return for double the pay, which is kind of what happens when you have that kind of efficiency. I can't make that decision for people. That is everybody's individual conscience to do. I can't tell people what's right or wrong. If people want more money and less fulfillment at work, I'm not going to point a gun to them and say, nope, you can't do it. Some people will make that choice, and that's fine.
You know what's cheaper than one guy screwing in that leg in the chair and having an utterly meaningless existence? Some child in the third world whose parents will sell them to a factory to work for 2 cents a day. Or what's cheaper than that? A freaking machine that'll replace all of us in our work. We literally have no purpose. Do you know what happens when people have no purpose in society span? That's when violence increases. That's when war happens. It is for the better of society that people have a place in this world. And you know what's even better than just a machine doing people's jobs? It's AI. AI is significantly better than us doing any jobs at all. And you know what they say? People like Putin and Elon Musk are saying the person who creates AI first is going to be running the world. And if that's a private company, God help us. God help us, because we're not going to have any purpose at all anymore. We're going to have nothing. We're going to be entirely under control of a corporation that has the smartest, most intelligent creature, basically a god on this earth.
I want to point out that it's been a lot of people from the left that have created this AI. They're creating all these AI. Well, you know, it's good to have that AI on your phone. You know, you can ask your phone stuff, and this is rudimentary AI, but you know, you can you know, have it do things for you, and things can be self-automated, and then turn around and get mad at their creation now is being used by companies to make their work more efficient, to make the thing cheaper. So now that, you know, what should be a phone, you know, for a lot cheaper price, more people can afford, so they'll have the AI on their phone that can help them do things. But then at the same time, they lose their job. Well, you know, a lot of people will make less money. A lot of people have made less money doing talk shows, YouTube programs, have given up their jobs to do this type of stuff. You don't need government to tell you to do that, or government to stop you from going, you know, I'm done not making the money. I want to go make a lot of money. I'm going to go work 2 jobs. I'm going to work 60 hours a week. I'm going to do that for 5 years. Bank me up some money, maybe start my own thing. You know, it's a lot of these arguments are kind of naive, I believe. But back to this.
We're going to be entirely under the control of a machine. Is that the idea? The machine is going to be big and armed and controlled, and is going to, make us stand in bread lines because it wants the bread for its own consumption. I'm not quite sure how this plays out in anything other than a paranoid science fiction fantasy scenario.
Well, all of the people that are well versed in this, like Musk and such, are saying it's a much bigger threat than even North Korea is right now. I mean, the only reason a lion that is more powerful than most of us is afraid of us is because of our intellect. That's the only reason lions are more afraid of us. And what's next? The only thing we should be afraid of is things that are more smart than us, and that's AI. And that's why all the people that are into this, that are intelligent, that know what they're talking about, are saying AI is one of the biggest threats, especially if it gets in the hand of people who only have profit as an interest and not the common goal of the people.
So your concern is there might be a central agency that would have direct control over the means of production. In other words, you have a science fiction fantasy fear of something that continually manifests itself in actual real communist countries. You know, I'll take the historical 94 million graves as a warning over the future Skynet death of humanity, Borg brain of infinite intelligence by computers. So
right, and let's just pretend capitalism has no crimes. Let's just pretend all of the slave labor, all of the dead people, all of the
no, slave labor, no. Okay, slavery, not
right,
capitalism.
That wasn't real capitalism.
No, slavery was not capitalism.
Play that wasn't real capitalism. Well, yeah, all of the dead people in a lot of these communist countries, that wasn't real communism.
Okay,
it wasn't. The state is supposed to dissipate after that, and it's supposed to become a community.
Let's do slavery, shall we? Excellent. All right. So slavery. Would you say, for instance, that ancient Egypt was a capitalist economy based upon your standards of sort of free market and free trade and private ownership of the means of production?
No, I wouldn't, because I'm honest, unlike you, who won't admit that shooting people in a gulag has nothing to do with Marxism and everything to do with the dictator.
We'll get back to me being on the defensive in a moment, but right now, you would not. So you would say that there are times when slavery existed when capitalism didn't, right?
Sure.
Would you also say that, I'm not proving causality here, but would you say that the rise and spread of the free market was at least to some degree coincidental with the fall and erasure of slavery across most of the world?
I don't know if I'd entirely agree with that. In fact, I'd say the war in the Civil War in America was mostly because the South didn't like the labor rights that were appearing in the North. And they liked their free market because their workers were literally working for free.
So 2,500 years ago, slavery throughout most of the Western world, no capitalism really to speak of. Now, in the modern world, well, slavery, there are still a few tens of millions of slaves, which is a terrible thing, and they generally are in third world countries. There are no particular slaves in the West, except maybe perhaps in a few third world enclaves. So we do have the rise of the free market, particularly serfdom fell away, which is a kind of localized slavery. Serfdom fell away, slavery fell away, and there are very strong economic reasons for that, which is you can't, there's no point automating your labor if you have slaves. So when slavery began to fall away, there was an increased incentive to automate. You know, it's the same thing like if you have massive amounts of third world immigration, you have less incentive to automate because wages stay particularly low. And so we do have a situation where as capitalism tends to spread, slavery tends to decline, and there's lots of reasons for that. It's impossible to efficiently allocate resources in a slave society. Capitalism requires self-ownership in order to establish property rights. Slaves don't have self-ownership and therefore go against the very definition of the free market. So the idea that you're going to try and conflate slavery with the free market, when the free market requires self-ownership, because you are the very first means of production that exists in your world, I think is specious and kind of sophisticated.
If I go to a store near me and I want to buy a hat or some sandals or some trinkets, a hairbrush, anything, where's that going to be made?
It's wherever you choose it to be made.
It's probably going to be made in China, like most of the things in
Consumers
America.
Are not passive, though.
You know,
if you don't want to buy something made in China, you choose where it's made.
People choose what they can afford. Now, people are pretending that America, there's no slavery, yada, yada, yada. No, you're just buying from people who own slaves, because a capitalist is going to look at the first person where they can buy the cheapest stuff, even if they're not enslaving someone themselves. They're sure as hell.
Now, I think she's conflating with wanting to be a poor person, but wanting to have as much flashy things as a wealthier person. So you buy everything that is made in China, so you have as much as the person that bought everything that was handmade in America, because you couldn't afford them. So you're making that choice because you want all that shiny stuff. So now you made that choice to buy something from China. So you're at fault if you want to blame the stuff being made in China. So that's a choice. And I don't think that registers in her head.
Buying the cheap stuff from people who are enslaving others. To pretend that capitalism has nothing to do with slavery, cheap labor, and workers' abuse is ridiculous. Let's just pretend JCPenney didn't have a store collapse on a bunch of slave workers in the third world. We can just pretend that didn't happen. We can just pretend there aren't the tiers of African kids on the diamonds you buy for your fiancés. Like, this is happening all over the first world. Things are being bought from third world slaves because capitalists are looking for the cheapest thing, not the most ethical thing, not the best thing for the community, not the things that are made with great craftsmanship and culture. They don't care about their community. They care about their freedom, because there's no responsibility in the eyes of people that are purely capitalistic. There's no responsibility to create a good society, a community, to have any other values, any leisure time, anything meaningful in life other than those charts. And people are just numbers to them. They're just statistics on their charts, and they're just the numbers they can get. The lower the numbers can. It doesn't matter who's enslaved. It doesn't matter who is making 2 cents an hour to pay for it. Like, it's ridiculous to assume that capitalism has nothing to do with that.
It's so strange to me, Lauren, when people say people buy the cheapest stuff they can possibly find. How much was your computer?
I work at a job where I have to edit stuff. Don't act like my work is the exact same as someone else's. Most people
could
will
you have
go
bought a cheaper computer? Is there a cheaper computer that could you have bought a 286 for $40 on eBay? Of course you could have. People buy stuff that is appropriate to their utility. This is why there are malls that have cheap stores. There are malls that have expensive stores. There are cheap beater cars and there are Maseratis. People buy a wide variety of quality. It depends on personal tastes. It depends on personal knowledge of things. It depends on your level of interest. Some people buy a Chromebook and other people pay $3,000 for a gaming machine because it suits their particular needs. And some people want stuff that lasts a long time and some people don't. Like when I was a student, I bought a futon. Now, it wasn't a terrible futon. It wasn't like I bought it third hand from Billy Idol's tour bus or something, but it was not a particularly great futon. Why? Because I knew I was going to keep it for university and then I was going to sell it or junk it. I didn't need it for a long time. Now I have a nicer place, so I buy nicer stuff that's going to last for a longer time. And now the idea that everyone looks for the cheapest thing too is also not the case, because there are ethical funds and people accept lower returns on investment in order to pursue particular ethical goals. People buy green products. People buy products that are stamped fair trade, and they pay more for those things. And this is a matter of informing people and helping them understand where good things are. And even these boycotts can be problematic as well, because the boycotts tend to affect the workers out there in remote areas. If you want workers to be able to compete better with other workers around there, then you need them to be more free. You need them to be more free. The workers in China is an ex-communist, still semi-communist country. I'm not just talking about Berkeley. I'm talking about even further to the west. We're talking about China. It's terrible out there. You've got people jumping off roofs. This is not a free market. They don't even have a free market in sex, for God's sakes. You can't have more than one children without being able to put it in some wood chipper in the woods, Fargo style. So they don't have a free market out there. And it's still, even with all of that, they're infinitely better than they were off under, 30, 40 million killed under Communist Mao's Great Revolution. It's like, yes, they're not making a lot of money. They should be more free. There should be more competition there to raise their wages. But you know what they're not doing?
As she rolled her eyes like, you got to bring up the bad parts of communism. Well, to have Marxism, you must initiate communism, which, well, you can't create a giant power over people and expect it, well, it'll dissolve. This same argument, what's his name, Cantwell's trying to make about fascism. Well, since I can't have a libertarian society, we'll use fascism to create this giant monopoly of power, and we'll get our power and we'll make a libertarian society. No, you can't. It doesn't work that way. You can't create giant swaths of power that are full authoritarian and expect them to go, okay, now that we've had control over society in its complete form where we could kidnap people and just shoot them, and you guys were okay with that because, well, we were getting rid of the bad guys. Well, guess what? We're not giving power up, and if you talk out, we'll just come and, in the middle of the night and kidnap you and shoot you. So, no, you can't do it. It doesn't work that way. When it does fall, it's after everybody's, hurting. Once everybody hurts and there's just no way out, it falls. Then you got to start from the ground up.
Eat onion peels, and they're not ripping open the pillows and eating the goose feathers because there's been this collectivization of the farm that results in a Holodomor-style mass starvation. So it is bad, and they've got enough freedom that it's better than it was before. More freedom would make it even better.
I'm not going to pretend that bad things haven't happened under so-called communist regimes. They have. Communism and how it's been practiced has not been perfect, but I'm extremely annoyed with this idea that you cannot admit that there are problems with capitalism. Are you going, I just want to get this straight. Are you going to pretend that there are no problems with capitalism, or can you name 3 of the biggest problems with capitalism for me right now?
Is there a problem with not using force to get your way? Sure. Sure there is. There's problems with people who want to use force to get their way. Capitalism means a respect for property rights and the non-initiation of force, the non-aggression principle. Respect other people's property, keep your word. And by property, I also include their sort of physical being. Right? Don't hit them, don't beat them, don't rape them, and so on. Now, are there problems that come in a society with freedom? Sure there are. There are tsunamis. There are touchdown horrible things, tornadoes and things like that. There's hail. There's raining frogs. And people make bad choices. A woman marries the wrong man. She has 3 kids, and he takes off with some cocktail waitress. People make bad decisions. But that's freedom. The search for perfection leads directly to hell. There is freedom. People have the right to live free of coercion. They have the right to live without any violence in their life unless there's an extremity of self-defense. They have a right to not be pushed around by a big, giant, violent bureaucracy called the state. They have a right to self-ownership. They have a right to their property to dispose of it through charity or through giving it to their kids or however they see fit. Do problems arise in those societies? Sure, of course, people get sick, people get hit by buses, but that's not the issue. The issue is they're not institutional problems. They're the problems that naturally accrue from freedom. You lock your kids in the basement, they're never going to get a sunburn. That doesn't mean they're better off.
Should you be able to sell heroin to a 5-year-old? Let's go to that one. Total free market. Should I be allowed to sell heroin to a 5-year-old?
I can't imagine a situation wherein a parent would allow a 5-year-old to have the money to buy heroin, or that a 5-year-old would know what heroin is or how to get it or what to do with it. So I can't imagine such a situation.
You may not be able to imagine it, but I sure as hell know when I was in high school, drug dealers came to our school and kids had money and jobs. I had a job at 13. I could buy drugs when I was 13 if I wanted to.
And in the 19th century,
But you said at 5 years old. That's not a high school student.
you could buy cocaine when you were a 6-year-old. Do you know how? In Coca-Cola. One of the first ingredients in Coca-Cola was cocaine. And you could buy heroin, even in the post-Second World War period. You could get them like 3 for a quarter in London. In London pharmacies and so on. So there has been times in the past where this stuff is widely available and is not particularly restricted. And you know what there wasn't? There wasn't a big giant opioid crisis. There wasn't a big giant set of drug addictions. There weren't ever escalating deaths from opioid addictions. That comes from the government funding healthcare. That comes from the government paying for all of these drugs. That comes from and general despair of people living in a dying society. But yeah, there have been times in the past where kids could go into drugstores and buy stuff. And you know what? They didn't.
And that should be allowed.
And there was not much of a problem at all.
Just yes or no. You should be allowed to sell heroin to 5-year-olds. Yes or no?
Compared to what?
What do you mean compared to what? It's a yes or
there's
no
no
question.
magic switch. There's no magic switch that you can just pull and say, now a magic force field goes up for every conceivable interaction involving things.
Are drug dealers now somehow exempt because, well, they're not supposed to sell drugs in the first place, so then, they're really not going to sell to a 5-year-old. Because drug dealers now, I'm sure will sell whoever the hell gives them the money, except for, they don't tend to usually do that because it's wrong. One thing when someone's, a little bit more self-control and making their own decisions, but, you ain't going to get a 5-year-old hooked on it. And, you keep going from 5-year-old to a high school student. Hold on, where are we on this?
If I ran a pharmacy, I would never sell heroin to a 5-year-old. And I would never, ever, ever go to any pharmacy that did that. And I think that's how things would be dealt with. But compared to what is important, Lauren, because if you say, well, should 5-year-olds be allowed to buy heroin? And you say, well, no. Well, that's not magic. What happens then is you have to create a big giant government with a massive tax apparatus. And, usually it ends up in fiat currency. It ends up in foreign wars and so on. It's like, I'll take the risk. Because I know where the other thing leads to. Just look at America. They got a big war on drugs, and it's horrendous. The number of people who are being chewed up through the prison industrial complex and the amount of organized crime that is destroying American societies and so on. And that all comes out of, originally, it was just trying to keep drugs out of the hands of wrong people. So compared to what? There's no magic force field that just suddenly emerges when you want something to happen in society. You have to create a tiny monopoly of people who have all the power in the known universe to impose their coercive will upon you. And then you have to cross your fingers and hope that for once in human history, power doesn't corrupt. But guess what? It always does. And that's what I mean when I say compared to what? Compared to a big, giant, imperialistic slave apparatus that sells children into intergenerational slavery. It's like, compared to what?
So your answer is yes to that. Okay, so let's say we get your perfect free market capitalist state that has no borders, all just free trade. What do you guys do when China decides they want America to be part of Russia? They want America to be part of China. What do you guys do? You going to free trade your way out of that one?
Hang on.
I'm saying,
why would you imply no borders?
Oh, isn't that a big disagreement? Why aren't borders a violation of the non-aggression principle, free movement of people?
Good heavens, now. Don't you have borders around your room right now? We have borders around your screen. I mean, you don't allow people into your house right now. You have borders around your house. When you have a car, you lock the car, you have borders around your car. So private property is your borders. I mean,
guess what?
imagine this.
Imagine
that you could buy up the land along the south of the United States and build a border. I mean, they're American. I guarantee you, if that were possible legally, then you would have had the wall that Trump is talking about. This wall would have been built decades ago, if not half a century ago, because that's what people want to do. They want to protect the stuff that they have. Of course, in a free society, there's no welfare state, which means that there's not this massive incentive to go into that society. But you can have complete borders when it comes to a country. You can just have people buy the land and say you can't cross the land. You can buy the land and build a wall. I mean, so compared to what? Again, it's compared to what? Compared to the wonderful borders that are going on in Canada and America and France and Germany and Greece and Italy and Spain. These places have no borders and they have giant governments.
What are you going to have McDonald's buy up all of the borders on the coast and make you buy?
Okay. And she goes right back to, corporations, corporatism. That's not free market. Do, 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 do.
Buy a Big Mac if you want to go past it and create the McWarlords to protect America. Like, what is the plan here? You seriously think that a corporation or someone buying up all of the borders on a coast is going to be great? What if I decide to buy up all of the land around your house and don't let you leave your house, man? Like, how's that going to work? I'll shoot you if you go on my property.
But see, all of these questions, you ask me like I'm the free market. You know, it's like, oh, yeah, Lauren, how do you build a cell phone? Oh, you don't know how to build a cell phone? I guess there's no such thing as a cell phone. Then is there? Because you don't know how to build one. I don't know. I know that people should be free. I also know that I would never buy a house unless it had guaranteed access to a road. Right? I mean, of course. I mean, I wouldn't bother buying that because I wouldn't want some. I would buy the land that is between me and the road. Right. And so the idea that someone's going to buy, I mean, these things could be easily solved in the free market through contracts.
What if I buy the road? What if I buy all the coast around America and don't let you leave, as your suggestion was to keep out other powers? Someone just buys up all the land around America and then creates the McWarlords to keep out the Russians.
Okay, not someone's going to buy up all the land around America. Multiple people would, and then they would give access, because one person might own a chunk of the border and says no one can cross my border. There's going to be our person right next door going, oh yeah, hey, for $1 you could get across my border. Shit, I'll make a hell of a lot of money. Oh, and then that's going to incentivize others to go, you know, I'll do it for 50 cents, 75 cents, a quarter.
I would never buy a house without guaranteed access to the road, which means that it would have to be transferred in any sale price. I mean, these are ways that you can solve all of this stuff.
Whose road is it going to be? Your road? Are you going to own all the roads so you can freely move on every single road everywhere? Like, whose road are you buying?
One person's going to end up owning all the roads?
Maybe. Monopolies sure happen.
So this is the idea that in the free market, you end up with a monopoly. Because you see, you're so alarmed and scared and terrified of the possibility of a monopoly. A monopoly.
Monopolies were created by government. A lot of people don't understand that because, you know, Rockefeller, oil, Standard Oil, and, it was the government that came in and broke up Standard Oil because they had a monopoly. Well, they had a monopoly because Rockefeller used the government to get the monopoly. He wouldn't have been able to even have the monopoly because of the free market. It was that he used government to get around the free market and people not wanting to give up property for, you know, less than what they wanted. Oh, you don't want to just give it up, or, hey, you know, I'm not moving. I like my house, or I like my property. I like my farm. I'm not moving. Well, guess what? You're on oil. He used government to get his monopoly. And then he used government to fake breaking up his monopoly. Help write the law to break up Standard Oil, where every company that came out of it, he had the ownership of. It was fake. She's believing in fake history because they don't teach you all that. Monopoly existed until government came in and broke up monopoly when they broke up Standard Oil, and we got laws against monopolies. Oh, you still have monopolies. Now you know what they call them to get around the monopoly law? They call them regulated monopolies. They're still monopolies. You want to see one regulated monopoly? Look at the power grid. They give permission for one company to put lines up in service. What's breaking the monopoly? The ability for solar, wind, and battery backup generators. That's the only thing that allows you to break the monopoly. Same with cable companies. I'm playing just a couple more minutes here.
With a lot of unchecked power. But somehow you think the state, which is a monopoly with a massive amount of unchecked power, is the solution to a possible monopoly. You will institute a giant Sauron-style monopoly in society in order to ward off the potential devil of a free market monopoly, which, by the way, has never once been shown in economic history to arise without the power of the state behind it. When you get monopolies in the, quote, free market, it is always because the monopolies ally themselves with the power of the state, and they create protectionist barriers, they create licensing, they create monopolies through the power of the state. There's not one example in history of a monopoly being created and sustaining itself in the free market. Because a monopoly, of course, what do? They raise their prices. That's what they want a monopoly for. That invites in competition. They can only raise their prices if they can collude to keep competition out, and they can only do that through the power of the state. So you're talking about using the state to control a boogeyman that has only ever arisen in history as the result of the state.
And basically what I was saying, I'm going to stop it there. There's an article on Reason. I urge people I didn't cover this because, well, I just kind of wanted to show the argument of Marxism. But article Reason.com, updating America's tax code can help gig economy workers new at Reason. Go check that out. That's a new article at Reason. It's in the Hit and Run blog section. Now, in history, in any type of free market history, monopolies have attempted to be created, but they're not. They're quickly knocked down because of free market situations. But when you have people like Rockefeller that were able to use government to gain their monopoly and then break it up, that's what you get when you create this power. So that's exactly what you're going to get. I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. Don't forget to go to ucy.tv, click the Amazon button down towards the bottom or the support button. Shop Amazon through ucy.tv and help support UCY without paying any higher costs or higher shipping rates. Get the same great deals, and you're helping out alternative media. And, we are the alternative mainstream media, which just keeps putting out the same agenda, no matter what station you turn to. Just like the reversal of DACA is cruel. That's the new word, cruel. Everybody's saying it. Watch any station, any of the pundits, cruel. Same word. I think they got all the same talking points. Thank you all. Stay tuned here on ucy.tv.
Keep it alive.